Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collapse Club, where our topic is, how are we to live in the time of collapse? I am David Baum in Seattle. With me is Karen Perry in Colfax, California. Hello, Karen.
Hey, David. Thanks for welcoming me back into the clubhouse again. It's fun to be here with you.
It's very nice to see you. We've talked before about collapse acceptance, of which you are a teacher, an advocate. Lately, you've had some terrible experiences where you live, and I wonder how those have affected your feelings about collapse acceptance.
Well, I suppose you're talking about wildfires because we live in the Sierra foothills in Northern California, and wildfire is definitely a reality of living here. So how does collapse acceptance for me factor into that? I think it helps me just be able to stay calm and grounded in the face of catastrophic events, because when you're in collapse acceptance, you understand that these types of events are just going to continue and there's no place to hide from them.
The current fire is the Mosquito Fire, which has burned, at last I read, 75,000 acres, has forced the evacuation of 11,000 people, and has brought smoke to your area, which is so thick that it is literally off the air quality index scale. What have been the effects on you at home?
Well, for us, it's really just the smoke. It's the big issue. When it comes, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's not. So you just don't know. And that fire started on a day when we had a heat wave in California and had temperature reading here of 114 in the shade, which is something I have never seen before. So living with heat and smoke is an interesting dynamic because we don't have air conditioning here. Our way of climate cooling our home is to open everything up at night and, bring in the coolest air we can and then close everything during the day. And so when it's smoky, it makes it, impossible to open everything up at night. And when you have an air quality index that's way off the chart, you can't even keep it from permeating into your home despite your best efforts. It's like opening your door with a wall of, angry killer bees or something. And, you try to go in and out really fast, but there's only so much you can do. So
you were trapped inside in 114-degree Fahrenheit heat, and you couldn't even open the doors or windows because the smoke was corrosive.
Right. That's essentially it. I mean, inside our home was maybe got to about 84 or something like that. So, but yeah. And then of course you can't go outside. You can't, you don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to get, you don't want to drive anywhere. You don't want to get in the car.
We had here, here in Seattle, we had 90 degrees and smoke for just a couple of days. My experience of it was that it's incredibly claustrophobic. You feel like the whole world is closing in on you and pressing on yourself. It's very disconcerting, drive you out of your mind.
It could if it went on for, prolonged amount of time. I mean, fortunately, with this fire, we've had enough that we got a break from the heat, and then we've had some wind, and we even got some rain recently, which is very interesting for us. And so we didn't have to endure too many days of it. But this isn't also it's not a new rodeo. We've gotten used to living with smoke as part of living here. And if it's not from a wildfire, it's from people doing prescribed burns or doing burn piles on their properties. So we finally get cooler, more lovely weather when you want to be outside, and then people start the activity of, burning and putting more smoke up there. So, but it's just, I'm not complaining. That's the other thing I want to be clear about. Like, I live here by choice. I understand what's happening. I am testifying as a witness to collapse. And that's why I'm talking about it, not because I want, to be like, oh, boo hoo, sucks for me, but.
Right. So let's talk about that a little explicitly. As the situation changes and the consequences of collapse, or the manifestations of collapse, get closer and closer to those of us who has as of yet escaped it by privilege or circumstance, by whatever, how are we supposed to accept it? How does it change? When it's theoretical, it's easy to accept. When it's real, it's harder, perhaps. Do you find that true?
Well, here's the thing about collapse. It's such a nebulous term, and everybody has lots of experience with collapse. I mean, think of a time in your life where you would feel like you'd hit a collapse. I think everyone could come up with an example. And we tend to outsource this ability to accept collapse on this huge macro scale, and then fail to recognize that we actually have a ton of experience. We have a great skill set on handling collapse. It could be the collapse of a relationship. It could be the collapse of a dream you had that will never happen. It could be the collapse of what my younger son just went through when he graduated from college in June and had been living in Santa Barbara oceanfront at the beach for 4 years with all his buddies. And then suddenly, boom, one day he packed everything in his car and drove back to Colfax. And it was like that whole life collapsed. And so we have a skill set that we use all the time, whether we really tap into it or not. So when your question of, a theoretical collapse, if you haven't experienced, a wildfire coming to your door, or you haven't experienced a flood or, earthquake, tornado, whatever it is, you have a skill set that kicks in when you're in that situation. And you just do the next right thing. Whether it's, oh, I got to grab a few belongings and get the heck out of here, or, it's whatever it is. But you just do what you do because you just do it when confronted with the thing.
So there's a natural set of human skills or powers that are available to respond to whatever situation presents itself to us.
Yeah. I mean, we use them all the time. Really. The world is always collapsing. It's happy equinox. For us here, it's fall, right? And for other parts of the world, it's spring. And so we're yin yang, and they're, blossoming, and we're collapsing. Every leaf that falls down from one of these oak trees here that's a collapse.
Let's go back and take a look at the fire as a concrete example of a major manifestation of what's going on. You sent me some photographs, which I have put into a little slide dealy, and I'm going to share them now. Let's see if it works. Oh, there we go. Okay. Tell us what we're looking at, please.
Well, this is What they describe as a pyrocumulus cloud. This is from the Mosquito Fire. This is taken, I think, the day after it started, and these clouds rise like 30,000 feet into the air. And they're absolutely gorgeous. Like it's, it's so crazy, but it's so devastating, but it's so beautiful at the same time. And it's huge. It's massive. So you can see, what happens. It rises up and then it settles back down. And then the smoke just like blankets everything.
Here's another view, zoomed in a little.
Yeah. This shot starts to give you a sense of scale. You can see the black smoke in the foreground, and that's always an indicator of, oh, really bad things are burning. Could be structures, propane tanks exploding, things like that. And then way down, I don't know if you can move your arrow, but way down, yep, right there. That little teeny tiny white thing is actually a huge DC-10 VLAT, as they call them, very large air tanker that gets deployed in the beginning of these fires to move in and drop a bunch of fire retardant and maybe water. I don't even know if they bring water anymore. I think it's a lot about the fire retardant, honestly.
How far away? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's about, from where I'm looking out at that vista, it's probably maybe like 12 miles, something like that, as the crow flies.
And here's another wider view of the whole fire, an official photograph.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty huge.
It's huge. And, it's 70, you said 75. Yeah, last number I saw was like 76,000 acres and some change. And we've had fires start every day this summer here. It literally happens every day. But they're so ready to jump on it as fast as they can. And the planes fly over us. And can you go back to that shot for a minute? Because I wanted to say something else about it. If that's possible. So
sure, yeah.
So they jump on them really fast. And if conditions are right, if it's not windy, if it's not too hot, if if there's no smoke, you can spot a fire pretty easily when they're flying around looking for them all the time. It's when you get this blanket of smoke, then how do you spot new smoke? How do you have anybody call in and say, oh, I smell smoke? All these like systems kind of break down. And the other thing I wanted to mention is because the foreground shows the forest, and what should be very obvious looking at this is how it's all the height of the trees is all essentially the same, right? Like we've adjusted our thinking of what a forest is to what we've been living with as what a forest is. But this is a juvenile forest because so much of this whole area was logged and 100, 150 years ago, whatever, down to nothing to build the railroads and build the cities and, build everything else. And, oh, there goes my light. Little collapse.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Looking,
and so,
I'm sorry.
So
smoke, I'm going to go on. The smoke came down, and here's a picture of the sun at one time of day, and here's another one. So this smoke was opaque on the ground, more or less, looks like.
Yeah, and my camera couldn't capture that sun, but it was bright red to the eye, like bright red, like eerie, evil red.
Yeah, the Eye of Sauron. And here's how it gets measured. This is the air quality index from airnow.gov. I've never seen this. 591, literally off the scale, unmeasurable. So bad.
Unmeasurable.
Yep. And this
Yeah,
is
and
what
the healthy range is like anything up to like 100. And then the designations become, unhealthy, very unhealthy, hazardous, run for your life, hold your
yeah,
breath,
don't breathe. Don't
don't
breathe
breathe.
anymore. Here's the fire at
Exactly.
night, I guess.
Yeah, it is the fire at night. And again, it's like, it's hard not to be like, wow, that's really pretty. But, it's also devastating. But then again, I mean, we've asked the forest to do something that the forest doesn't want to do, which is never to burn. And that's what I was, talking about the forest. Like it needs to burn. Fire is part of the cycle of the forest. And because we've, moved in and inserted ourselves so much and demanded that we never burn, we've put the whole forest at risk and thus ourselves at risk, right? I was doing some tree work helping Jordan yesterday, and there's this plant called manzanita, and it's kind of a very thick, woody, bushy plant, extremely flammable, like high heat, like can melt your fireplace if you like try to burn it, for warmth or something. And so I was cutting a lot of this out of this property to try to help, fire secure it a little bit more. And I had the huge epiphany that like this is a native plant here because it's supposed to burn. That's why it's here. It's supposed to help with accelerating this burning of the forest. But of course, we don't let it burn. So we have to say, bye-bye. I'm removing you.
So you're saying that fires like the mosquito fire are part of the natural cycle that the forest would go through in the absence of human inhabitation?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, lightning strikes happen, something burn, it starts to burn. And then if it's a healthy forest system, it will stimulate new growth. It will take care of overgrowth. All those kinds of things are, it's all built into the system of the planet here. Amazingly enough, this planet knows what to do. It's only when we get in the way and, try to stop all these natural systems or tweak them or adjust them to our demands that then we have to come in with more systems and more systems to try to control what's really not controllable, like with the retardant drop.
Speaking of which,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So that's one of those huge DC-10 tankers doing a fire retardant drop. There was last Tuesday, this fire jumped over the middle fork of the American River and took off again, and like a whole new part. It was like 300 acres or something. And so I read that day that they had dropped 200,000 gallons of this red fire retardant stuff. And then you just go, oh, okay, well, what's in that? And what are the consequences of that? And what if it gets into the water system? And does it kill trees? This isn't like a benign thing. And the answer to all those questions is yes, it gets into the water system. It's toxic. Yes, it kills trees. Absolutely. That first picture you showed, there were trees in the foreground that were totally dead because of a retardant drop that had been very close to us. And so then they become a fire hazard because you've killed more trees to try to not kill trees. It's just all this like crazy homo colossus trying to control this planet that continues to backfire on us, on our species.
So the consequences of the fire, the follow through, this is a burn scar, I think you call it.
Yeah. And that one I can walk to because August of 2021, we had to run from a fire that got close enough to us. We were evacuated for 5 days. There were flames on the property right across the street from us. I can see the burned out slope. It's not as bad as this, but it's definitely bad from where I'm sitting right now. And this is the other side of that canyon wall from me in the Bear River Canyon.
Here's another view
yeah.
of a, yeah.
Yeah, and this is they had started to go in and then just like cut down everything. So it's all it's, you know, so then what do? You cut it all down. Well, now you've got, you know, what looks like just like a bald head or something. And then of course you've got issues with slides and what's going to grow here next. And, you know, it's devastating.
What's this place?
This is Bear River. And in the, you know, distance there, you see I don't know if you can zoom in, but you see the burn scar. And then these trees that look like they're have fall colors on them. No, they're all, you know, singed, burned. So it raced up this river canyon. And yeah, it was devastating. I'm surprised we're still here, but we're still here. So you just live with it. And that's what collapse acceptance has me grounded in, is you just accept and do what you can and try not to let it ruin your life.
You seem to be almost cheerful about the chaos, not the chaos, the natural progression of nature reasserting itself against the artificial ordering of humankind. And I sometimes feel that sort of a riotous joy that, oh man, all this bullshit is going to finally get overwhelmed by the magnificent forces that gave birth to it in the first place. It's like time to go back to the source now. And there's terror in that because I'll be dissolved just as much as anybody else, but it's also a joy in a way to feel like Mother Nature's coming back into her own. What do you think?
I think you said that very well. I do feel joyful sometimes because I'm a participant in the community of life and I'm on that side. I'm not on team civilization. I'm on team community of life. I'm on team this planet. And so pushing back and standing up against civilization in all forms is something that I align with very strongly. So yeah, there is something in me that says, well, that's fair because we haven't been fair with our home planet and we haven't been fair with the rest of the community of life that has just as much a right to be here as we do. And we haven't treated them fairly. And it's sickening to me that it's more important that we have, you know, well, I'll just use this example because I was in a Costco recently, and it's the skeletons and the Halloween blow-ups, right next to the Christmas trees and, all that stuff. And you're just like, really? Like, we don't have enough Halloween decorations and Christmas decorations on the planet, but we have to be making more of them and using the planet for that. Like, that's just like one teeny tiny example, but we're like lapping back around into holiday season again when it's just like more ridiculousness. And we just, there's just too much of everything and too much of not playing fair and thinking that we're in charge and that we're winning or something. I don't even get it. But yeah, I'm on Team Earth, Team Planet, Team Wild World. Civilization can kiss my ass.
Thank you. That's a manifesto if I ever heard one. So you've been doing some work with a discussion group. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that group and then the effort that's coming out of that to help other people establish groups for themselves.
Thanks for asking about that. I'm really excited about that chunk of my life that I'm using my what I call global hospice time for right now, because it's been a really lonely ride. I mean, I've accepted where we're at in terms of civilization and the direction that we've been heading, which is essentially off a cliff for about a decade now, and have found it to be a really lonely place to be because people just don't want to talk about collapse. Especially people of privilege don't want to talk about like this ride ending. And so through Michael Dowd's post-doom discussion group, and with his help to get it launched, I was able to start a women's group called, now we're calling it Bloom with Grace, Getting Real About Collapse Extinction. So where we can just gather and have actual real conversations, and every single wonderful, amazing, wise, courageous woman in our group all comes in with the same story. I get it. I understand. I felt something was wrong for a very long time. I have no one to talk to about it. And it's lonely. So we get together, we talk about it. And there's women in our group from 9 different countries and all across the United States. And we just get real about it. We don't debate the science or really bring in a lot of like the latest like calamity. No, this is about how do we live with this? How do we become our best selves in the face of collapse? How do we answer Joanna Macy's call of collapsing well? Is that possible? How do we figure out ways to talk to others who just are insisting on head in the sand denialism? And it's been a really powerful experience that's been going now since February. And I'm super grateful to all the beautiful bloomers who are walking this path with me, because it no longer feels lonely. And that's so important. And that's probably why I'm more joyful than not, in a lot of respects. And I have a partner who's really supportive as well.
If people want to take part in this conversation, how can they do that?
Well, I'm available to be contacted by email. I don't know if you have it in the notes, but you can put it in there. And I can share some information about it that way. I'm open. I'm very open to supporting others in getting their own oxygen masks on first related to collapse understanding, so that we can help others, because collapse is coming for everyone. you can't hide from collapse. You know, again, I started with these personal examples in your life that everybody has stories, and it's just on this, you know, bigger trajectory that we're all going to be experiencing more and more. I mean, the ice isn't coming back in the Arctic. There are consequences to that, as just one example, you know.
You mentioned grace, getting real about collapse, extinction. I'd like to talk about that conjunction between collapse and extinction. I use collapse as consciously as a euphemism to encompass extinction and other events or phenomena which are really, really disturbing, and it's difficult to talk about them in everyday life. Collapse seems to be clear about what you're talking about without driving all the way to the darkest implications. And I think it's appropriate, it's fine to talk about it in that way. But I think one must consciously negotiate that border between collapse, which is something that we can sort of cope and deal with, and extinction, which carries, to me, a more dreadful aspect. And I just wonder if you could talk about dealing with that sort of existential dread at the far end of the discussions that we have.
That's a great question. Extinction is a tough concept to wrap one's head around, although we've been present for the extinction of many other creatures, sentient beings here, and somehow have this understanding that we're immune from that. And it feels as if these two things go hand in hand this time around of civilizational collapse, because of the collapse of the biosphere that we depend on for life, at the same time as our civilization, this experiment of living differently away from the rest of the community of life is collapsing again, as they always have. I just accept it as a part of being in this reality of life currently. And it doesn't fill me with a bunch of dread, I suppose, because if when I'm one of the extinct, then it just is. So it doesn't appear that there would be an opportunity to sit around and then be like, oh my gosh, we're all extinct. So it won't really matter. And to me, it's about the quality of life right now and being able to be present and mindful of the living that I get to do right now, and not project onto some whatever that's coming that I have no control over. We're all just here to be part of this whatever, participating in this biggerness, this bigger entity that none of us really completely understand. And I know that the universe continues, whether our species is extinct or not. And I feel like I'm part of the universe more than I'm part of this species.
That's a very interesting standpoint. An interesting point on which to stand is to identify with all of life and with all of the universe rather than with a particular species, or even, and this is more esoteric, even a particular individual, particular life. I have confidence in the cyclical nature of nature, and every end is a beginning. So for me, extinction is the beginning of the next phase. And people have a lot of different views about what the next phase looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and I see that life, what you just said essentially is life continues beyond death. Our culture has framed it wrong. We always say life and death, life and death, life and death. No, it's birth and death. Life is something else that continues.
I agree. Life is inexhaustible, changes form, but never dies. Birth and death are marks on the timeline of life. To bring it back to the real world, so-called, on the way out here, there has been rain recently where you have conditions, the living conditions day to day become easier for you humans in your area?
Well, water is everything. So yes, I mean, it's been so dry. All the forests here are struggling. All the creatures are struggling. I witnessed here was the thing, like during that smoke, I was able to come inside and shut my doors and windows and run some fans and, drink clean water and all of that. And I was watching the wild creatures out my window who had no such privilege. They were hot, they were lethargic, they were splashing around in the fountain that I have. These are the birds trying to cool off. And they didn't get to have that break, but they do now with the rain. And I'm super grateful for that, because we don't typically get a lot of rain here before November. So having this little respite of cooler temperatures and some water. I mean, you could just see in this little foresty grove I was working in yesterday with doing this tree work for some neighbors. I mean, just the moss just popped in these vibrant green colors off the rocks and off the oak trees. And you could see like witch's butter, which is a, mushroom fungi growing on some of the downed logs, and some turkey tails, and just how instantly everything springs back to life with water. So it's just a good reminder of how precious water is, and how it's so taken for granted. And just that ability to turn your tap and get on demand, clean, fresh water is such a gift. And, as things get harder and harder, I hear food referenced a lot as a problem. And everything in the back of my head always says, it's water. It's water. I mean, if you don't have access to a reliable water source, I mean, you've got 3 days at the most. So yeah, it's been amazing. The temperatures are cooler. You can feel it's easier to go outside and breathe. And it's been an interesting dynamic, because some people are really suffering under the weight of water on our planet right now.
I think that's part of the diagnosis or the prognosis for climate change, global warming, is the extremes become greater, more floods and more droughts. There's more water vapor in the air, that changes the weather patterns. So when it rains more, but also historical patterns of rain and monsoon are changed, leading to both droughts and floods. So it's a strengthening of the extremes, I think, is what they tell us is to be expected.
Yeah, and even if they didn't tell us, you'd already know because it's happening. I mean, this is the thing about, collapse understanding is you don't have to outsource it to anybody else. You just have to look into yourself for the knowing that you've always had as a creature born wild and free, like all the other creatures. You're the same. And it's just tapping back into that knowing to get it. I mean, people bury themselves in books. Oh my gosh, there's so many books out there and articles and videos and information galore about, you can just spend all your time learning about all of this. And yet at the end of the day, you already know, like, this isn't the way our species was meant to interact here. And there are consequences to that. And if you go outside, if you pay attention at all, you know that the weather's changing, you know that there's weirdness happening. It's all very obvious. And that's why I think so many people are in denial. Because you can't be in denial of something that you don't think exists. So denial is actually a really healthy response as a first step.
People understand what's going on, but they haven't yet discovered a pathway within themselves to accept and live within the new context.
Exactly. But they know that it's there. It's like that itch you can't scratch.
Yikes, terrible. Well, I agree. I think you go outside, you can see if you collect news at all, the news is fairly obvious. And just tiny little point to add to that, I think it turns out that if you are a metaphysician, if you simply study the structure of sort of thought and intelligence, you can see in that realm also, as obvious as it is to walk outside and see the climate changing and feel what that means, that it's leading to collapse, you can sense how people think and understand that our human ways must lead and are leading to a collapse, a tumultuous ending. It's just part of our story now.
It is. And the other part of our story is, how are we going to show up? Are we going to transcend this, civilization addicted, comfort and convenience addicted, distracted, narcissistic, cultural way of being? Are we going to elevate out of that and really try to get back closer in alignment with our kin here? The same kin that breathes the same air we breathe, that looks at the world through two eyes and breathes in through a nose and takes in nutrients through a mouth and digests them through a system and puts them back out the other end and has appendages. And, same. And so rising to that challenge as part of this collapse story, to me, seems, as Michael Dowd would say, holy work.
Yes, I think we need to declare and live our allegiance to the earth, to Mother Earth, whence we come, who nurtures us and loves us. We have abandoned her in a terrible act of neglect and criminal indifference. And as you say, there are consequences. Pat McCabe likes to say that the justice of Mother Earth is inevitable and all powerful. I agree. And the power against which we have arrayed ourselves as human beings is unimaginably great. And it's time to be humble. It's time to beg forgiveness. It's a special spiritual path that we must tread right now for our own redemption.
Yeah, I believe that that's the case. Side note, none of us chose this. So, we didn't get a chance to vote and say, hey, do you want to play global industrial civilization? Raise your hand. And therefore feeling wholly responsible and carrying around a whole bunch of guilt related to all of it, which is something I see a lot as part of the kind of yin yang package of being able to fix it, a responsibility to fix it, and then therefore a responsibility to have done it better. And I just throw all that out because we're just here having this experience and doing our best with the hand we've been dealt. And I don't think it serves us to, I think it's important to call everything by its right name and be able to call it out for what it is and come to terms with that. But then releasing the blame and the shame and the guilt, and just maybe finding some small way to feel like you're giving back, to contributing to something good, something bigger, better than yourself on the plus side of the ledger. Even if it's, collect that spider in the house and help it outside and instead of smushing it, or, and let that be enough in terms of the forgiveness piece somehow. I know if you surveyed a bunch of us, we'd all be like, yes, we want to change everything and make it so much better. We all would, right? So it's beyond our ability to stop this civilization machine. But it is within our ability to participate more in the life that's right around us and see the good in what we have still.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for joining me today to take some steps along the path of this journey of discovery in this difficult time. I really appreciate your being here.
Thanks for letting me. You're awesome. I love what you're doing with this Collapse Club channel, and everyone is lucky to get to listen to your conversations and your awesome questions. And really am grateful.
Thank you.
Because we got to talk about it. If we don't talk about it, then that's terrible. So keep talking.
All right. And thank you to the folks who dropped in to watch the live broadcast as well. Thank you for being here. didn't get a chance to respond to you in the chat. I'll figure out how to do that better, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Karen. This has been Collapse Club. I am David Baum in Seattle. That was Karen Perry from Colfax, California. Until we meet again, farewell.